All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to start in the speech at paragraph 23. So if you could find paragraph 23 in not the speech, the letter from Birmingham Jail, and that's where we're going to start. Starts in the second sentence of the letter. And you're going to want to make sure that the notes here in the margins and the things underlined that you have the same annotations. I know that this is a difficult letter, and part of what makes it difficult is the intricate nature of the ideas that Martin Luther King Jr. is expressing, the ways that he built on his ideas, the connections that he makes across texts, and he assumes that we are as well read as he is and the people that he's writing to. So let's see how well we could do. All right, so paragraph 23. I must confess that over the past few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. So that's who he's turning to. Okay, so white, you notice the note over here, white moderates block progress. So if you think about a moderate, it's like someone in the middle, and they don't want to go too fast or too slow. And for Martin Luther King, this is a problem because he wants things to progress and he feels as though the white moderate is standing in the way. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action. So let's look at what he's doing here. So he's contrasting certain problems, and it's kind of ironic that he would say that it's the white moderate and not the extreme white racist that is the problem. And so he is saying the white moderate is balancing certain things, order versus justice. So make sure you underline those two concepts. So for them, if they're going to have prioritize order versus justice, they'd rather just have their lives be nice and everything work out than to actually seek justice for other people. They prefer a negative peace. So just no fighting. Let's just not fight. They're the kind of people who just say, hey, don't fight, to an actual positive peace. So they would prefer the appearance of peace than actually having peace, which Martin Luther King Jr. sees as a problem. And they're going to be really nice about it, right? They're going to say, hey, I agree with you, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's a great idea. But you know what? It's not rock the boat. Things are going to happen in their own time. Paternalistically means to treat people like children. So they almost treat him like a kid who has like a great idea, um, or who comes to their parents with an idea and the parent is not really wanting to do it, but they kind of tell the kid like, "Oh, that's pretty good. I'm glad you thought of that." So they kind of really talk down uh, to to Martin Luther King. All right, let's keep going. So there was who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. So make sure you underline that. That's a key idea. And he says it twice, like two different ways. Right? Shallow understanding is the same thing as lukewarm acceptance. Um, and that absolute misunderstanding is very similar to outright rejection. And so he's kind of like saying, if you have an enemy, you know where they stand. But these people in the middle, you don't know where they stand, and rather than just being on nobody's side, they end up slowing you down, and they don't really want to get involved. They don't want to do anything that's going to cost them anything. And so for Martin Luther King, this is a bigger problem than the racist. Um, and it's more frustrating. It's like that best friend that you thought was going to be there for you, and then when you really need them, they're not, and they don't want to go out of their way to help you. So this is very frustrating. Okay, so we're moving on to the next paragraph, and he's going to get into a new topic. So make this note in the margin that he's going to move on to the idea that tension is necessary for progress. That if you're really going to get things done, you cannot escape conflict. You cannot just want to be nice and actually have things change. All right, next paragraph. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. Right? So, justice, he's asserting justice as something active. We're not trying to guard um, something that already exists, but law and order is there for a positive thing, to establish justice, to create more justice than exists right now. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of a human personality. So this is a key idea here, that this tension that everyone's feeling, he's saying it's necessary. It's like when you go to the gym and you work out. If you never sweat, if you never struggle, then you're not going to get to that next phase. And if you're going to the gym and you're like, oh, I'm just going to use the weights that I can already lift, and I don't want to, I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to, get too sweaty. Then your muscles are never gonna grow. You're never going to be fit. And so that's what he's saying that the white moderate is like. They want to get rid of the tension because it makes them uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It's a stage in the transition from a sort of false justice to an actual true justice. The words he uses for that is substantive and positive. So rather than absence of conflict, we actually have every person respecting the dignity and worth of all others. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. So the people just want to be nice. They accuse him of creating tension. And he's saying, no, I'm not creating the tension. I'm just shining a light on what already exists. I'm bringing it out to the open. It's like a doctor, right? If you go to the doctor and the doctor finds that you are sick, the doctor didn't create the sickness. When you go to the dentist does not create cavities. He just points them out to you. And that's what Martin Luther King says is going on here. He says, we bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with. Like a boil. A boil is like a raised red part of your skin, um, like like a diseased part of your skin. I guess a pimple would be something like a small one, but he's thinking something more significant. That can never be cured so long as it is covered up, but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. So his assertion is there's already a sickness. I'm not creating the sickness. I'm just bringing it to light. And unless we bring it to light and we clean it out, it will never be dealt with and it will become worse. Now, as a reader, we can ask if this is true. One thing that on his side, right, is that this is nonviolent. So he's not provoking people with violence, but he is doing direct action. Things like sit-ins or refusing to do certain things, maybe blocking people from doing stuff. So it's not violent. He's not attacking anybody. So we could question him. Is this really true? Is he not creating any of this tension? But I think he does have kind of a strong case that this tension already exists. All right, now we're moving on to he's going to examine directly the logic or the logos, to speak in the words of our lecture, of the clergymen. So if you remember, clergymen are pastors of different faiths there in town, and he wants to see, do your arguments hold up? Are you being logical? Here we go. In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. And here, precipitate means to cause. But is this a logical assertion? Isn't this like condemning a robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Socrates? Now, Socrates was a very famous Greek philosopher who was killed by the people of Athens for asking questions that made them feel uncomfortable, because his unswerving commitment to truth and his philosophical inquiries precipitated the act by the misguided populace, in which they made him drink hemlock, and hemlock is a poison. So he's using Socrates, one of the most famous Greek philosophers, and now he's going to try to make his case even stronger, right? So if you think who is one of the greatest religious thinkers, he's going to mention Jesus. Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? Think about both those guys. Socrates and Jesus never actively hurt, did violence toward, did anything direct that we would call like an evil action, getting revenge. Yet both of them were killed, Socrates and Jesus. And so he's saying, you are telling me that I'm causing the problems, and that would be like blaming Jesus for the crucifixion. So Jesus was confronting evil, and he was crucified for it. Socrates was confronting bad philosophy and was killed for it. And he's saying, do we blame Jesus? Do we blame Socrates for their deaths? We must come to see that, as the federal courts have consistently affirmed. Actually, but that makes me think right now. I mean, that's kind of a high claim, though. He's putting his cause in the same level as Socrates and Jesus. That's kind of an aside. We must come to see that, as the federal courts have consistently affirmed, it is wrong to urge an individual to cease his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the question may precipitate violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. So make sure you put brackets around that. That's a key idea, that if you're truly going to have justice, you don't want to sort of hide what's going on, but you have to actively protect those who are being treated unjustly. Next paragraph. And here's an example of a white moderate. Here's an example of what they would say. I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. I have just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, and one thing I want to point out, you might want to circle those words, white brother. Notice how he never gets bitter, never attacks. There's always that camaraderie, even with the people he disagrees with. He writes, all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually. But it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral and can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that the time is always ripe to do right. Wow. Those are some strong words right there. So this whole section focuses on the white moderate and their misconception of time. So they act like time is a neutral thing. That time, if you just let it pass, will always lead to progress. And he's attacking that idea. Time will move, or sorry. So people act. So he's not attacking the neutrality of time. People act like time is always positive. That if you let time pass, things get better and better and better. And he's saying, and that's why we circled this, that time is actually neutral. It will pass, but people either make time destructive or constructive. Time itself can't do that. So, right now, if we don't actively do anything with the time, if we sit back, right, and this is gets to the heart of what he's attacking about the white moderate, that they sit in silence and they act like things will just happen naturally. And he's saying no. And we see this pairing again of the white moderate being paired with um, being as bad as the racists of that time, right? We not only have to repent meaning to turn around, change our mind, feel shame over hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. In today's language, we would say something like, we not only have to repent of something like bullying, but also the people who stand by and do nothing, bystanders. Human progress never comes inevitably. And so he gets down to his main point here. Time has to be used creatively. If we don't do anything, it will just pass. And that actually is on the side of those who don't want things to change. And this is something you might even want to put a star by this, this idea in the, because this is next big idea. Time is always ripe to do right. You don't have to wait around. There's not going to be some message in the sky that's going to say, all right, do the right thing now. There's always now is the time to do the right thing. Okay. Here, stagnation means not moving. He uses a metaphor here in this note, right? Silence is as bad as hateful words and actions. These are very strong claims. And he's kind of getting deep on us, right? Talking about the nature of time and the nature of human action in time. And these are things definitely worth thinking about in your own life. How are you using time? Do you think as time passes, you're just going to naturally get better, or is it something you have to work at? All right, now is the time to make the real promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. There's those metaphors again. And metaphors put images in our mind that communicate ideas, that connect with our emotions, that hopefully get us to move towards action. All right, let's see how long this paragraph is. All right, we'll go through a couple more paragraphs here. And then, let me see how much longer we've got, because I don't want to stop. And then I was almost at the end. Whew. I forgot just how long this letter is. Okay, we'll go through a little bit more and then we'll work on some more as when I actually come back face to face. All right, next paragraph. So we've been focusing on the white moderate. Now we're going to move to this next main point, that Martin Luther King is accused of being an extremist. So being at the outer edges, like he's kind of out of control, and that King feels that he's in the middle of two extremes. So they're saying you're at one end, you're way out here at this end of being crazy, and he's saying no, I'm trying to be balanced between complacency, doing nothing, and being that angry person who's going to use violence, and I'm trying to walk this middle path. Here's how he argues for that. You speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I began thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of complacency, made up in part of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so drained of self respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation, and in part of a few middle class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other, the, the other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various black nationalist groups that are springing up across the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incorrigible devil. Wow. So again, he's being attacked as an extremist. He's saying, no, I'm not. I'm trying to balance two things. And this is two things within his own community. So he's moving away from talking about the white moderate to these two forces within the black community of the time. One is this complacency, either through being oppressed or because you had at this time middle class blacks who felt like, hey, my life is great. I don't know what you're talking about. And then this other force of bitterness and hatred. So there were black nationalist groups at the time, things like people like Malcolm X and other groups who would begin to advocate violence. And so they kind of took this message farther about you must do action, we can't be complacent, and they use that as an excuse to be violent, to almost, I guess, like a revolutionary mentality. And Martin Luther King is a very committed Christian. So when he says they repudiated Christianity, he's contrasting their this American Muslim movement. If you want to look it up, you can look up Elijah Muhammad and read more about it. But he's kind of contrasting that with the Christian view about nonviolence. And they see all those on the other side, right? They sort of demonize them. Every white person's an incorrigible devil. Martin Luther King says, I'm trying to walk between these two groups. So to call me an extremist is wrong. I'm trying to be a true moderate, someone who's walking between complacency and this sort of violence. Okay. Next main point. He feels as though he's offering a better choice. Okay. These are the two options that he's trying to walk between, and he's saying, I have a better option. I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need to emulate neither the do nothingism of the complacent nor the hatred and despair of the black nationalist. For there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle. And, in modern society, religion gets downplayed. And frequently, when we talk about Martin Luther King, we don't talk often about religious views. And here he's making the strong case that it is the love experienced through the church and the belief in his Christian faith that he feels, um, he calls it here, an integral part of our struggle. That those motivating forces, Jesus's message of nonviolence and love, is what um, gives him the strength and power to do this. So we don't want to minimize the role that religion plays in something like seeking for justice. So he feels like he offers a better choice, and he feels like this choice eliminates this move towards violence. If this philosophy had not emerged, meaning this excellent way of love and nonviolent protest, by now many streets of the South would, I am convinced, be flowing with blood. And I am further convinced that if our white brothers dismiss as rabble rousers and outside agitators those of us who employ nonviolent direct action, and if they refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of Negroes will, out of frustration and despair, seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies, a development that would inevitably lead to a frightening racial nightmare. So he's pointing out the danger of pushing people in his group who are committed to love and nonviolence. That if you accuse them of being the other group, you're just going to push them into that group. So they really have to watch out. Let's see how long this paragraph is. All right, this will be our last one right here. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom, and something without has reminded him that it can be gained. Consciously or unconsciously, he has been caught up by the zeitgeist, that's the spirit of the times, and with his black brothers of Africa, because there were movements towards justice and freedom in places like South Africa right at this exact same time in the 60s. Apartheid in South Africa was being attacked. And his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean. The United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency toward the promised land of racial justice, another metaphor. If one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand why public demonstrations are taking place. The Negro has many pent up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let him march. Let him make prayer pilgrimages to the City Hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. Now we can question that. Is that really not a threat? Because it sounds like a threat. So I've not said to my people, get rid of your discontentment. Rather, I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontentment can be channeled into the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this approach is being termed extremist. And that's quite ironic. All right, that's enough for today. Maybe study your vocabulary, work on things from other classes, but it's a lot of hard thinking for one day.